guys, and welcome to another Treasures from Our Attic. This week I'm going to show you an artifact in our collection that has probably the most mysterious backstory and unfortunately raises more questions than answers. This gravestone was found in the basement of the old Stanly County Courthouse when they were getting ready to tear it down in 1973. And when it was donated to the museum, the only information that came with it stated that when they found it, that the stone had shown evidence of being in the ground at one point. Anything else that we'd like to learn about the gravestone, we have to look at what's on the gravestone itself, and unfortunately that does not tell us too much either. If we come and look at the inscription right here, it says Momente Moria, and that is Latin for remember that you will die. We have the name Thomas Hofflin. We have these initials STCOR, and then we have a skull and crossbone motif. There are no dates on the stone, which is pretty uncommon, but based on the inscription and the motif on the stone, we can date this to the 1700s, just because in the 1700s there was a real focus on the certainty of death. And Momente Moria was a very common inscription that was on stones in the 1700s. There's another Latin phrase that was pretty common that said, what you are, I was, what I am, you will be. The skull and crossbones was also very common in the 1700s, as well as another morbid image, the veiled figure of death, the skeleton. In the 1800s, they started moving away from focusing on the certainty of death, and images became much more romanticized, and there were the weeping willows and draped urns, and less morbid sayings on the stones. So even though the 1700s is actually very early for Stanly County history, and just for comparison's sake, Stanly County itself wasn't even formed until 1841. This stone most likely is from the 1700s. This was also not the only item that was found in the courthouse when they were getting ready to tear it down. As they were pulling up the floorboards in the courtroom itself, they found a skeleton. And according to local accounts, it was bleached white and grinning upwards. And so you can imagine probably how that went over. The police were called, but after closer inspection of the skeleton, they think most likely it was a medicinal skeleton. There were cut marks on the bones that were consistent for doing medical experimentation, and the bones were also all wired together. About a century ago, it was very difficult to actually find medical skeletons, and they were very valuable, and people would sometimes resort to a little bit of grave robbing to get a skeleton. So all that's interesting, though, it doesn't really answer why the skeleton was under the floorboards of the Stanly County courtroom for over 50 years. And we can at least answer part of that question. Soon after the skeleton was found, a gentleman came forward and said that he had been part of the restoration work that was being done at the old courthouse in the 1920s. And he and a couple other workmen found the skeleton in a closet, and they thought it would be funny to put the skeleton under the floorboards in the Stanly County courtroom, and then apparently forgot about it for the next 50 years until it was found. The workmen, unfortunately, though, did not know how the skeleton came to be in the courthouse in the first place. So taken separately, a skeleton being found in a courthouse or a gravestone being found in the courthouse, you know, it's pretty interesting, but put them together and it really kind of creates an interesting mystery. Do they even have something to do with each other? Is a skeleton Thomas Hofflin? Was he dug up and they used his body as a medical skeleton and took his gravestone as evidence to make sure nothing was left behind? Was the skeleton just used simply as a tool during testimony, during court trials for medical testimony? Who was Thomas Hofflin? Was he a gentleman that lived in this area in the 1700s? We have tried a little bit of research to see what we can find out, but so far he has not shown up in any of the written records. And most likely we will never know the answers to these questions. It will be 100 years in 2023 since the skeleton was first found in the closet by the workmen, and so anybody who could give us any kind of information is no longer with us. So we'll probably just have to be resigned that this will just be one of those mysteries that we have, and a great story for us to tell about some of our treasures in the attic. Well, that's it for today, and I hope to see you all next week. Thanks, guys.